Good morning, everyone. Have I pressed all the right buttons here? Have I switched the microphone on? Have I rolled the titles? Yes, I believe I have. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy that you could join me and Julia this morning. Julia is hacking away at the keyboard. I'm hacking away at whatever this setup turns out to be. I've got so many bits and bobs sticking out everywhere, wires and things like webcams and lights and microphones sticking out everywhere. 3 monitors on my desk, all to bring you good entertainment and a good 3D live experience, I hope. First of all, hallo nach Deutschland. Christina, I hope you're doing all right. I hope your treatment is going well, and I hope it's soon going to be over and you'll be back to your former self. That is my sincere wish for you. And of course, hello Rod to Independence, Missouri, I believe. You're 1 hour ahead of me. We're on Eastern Standard Time here in Miami Beach. Lovely that you could all make it. I'm really happy about that. 2 small pieces of news that you have of course heard already. Last week's announcement was that Adobe have bought Algorithmic. Controversial, very interesting. We're not sure where that's going to go. Algorithmic is the company that makes this thing called Substance Painter, and they have a library of materials called just Substance or Substance Source, I believe. And what they do is you basically can drag and drop materials onto surfaces in things like 3D render engines, like real-time render engines. It's not quite drag and drop for iRay just yet, but it's very, very popular for people who use Unity or the Unreal game engine. And this is something I've been meaning to look into. I love what people can do with both Unreal and Unity, and perhaps 2019 is the year to do that. So that's number 1. We'll see how that goes. I'll see if that'll entice me to purchase the Creative Cloud subscription, which I think for $50 a month is just a bit too much for me right now. So, but we'll see where that goes. Maybe if they add it for the same price rather than charge extra money, you never know with Adobe. One of those things. So that's one piece of news. The other piece of news that, of course, we have a brand new poser figure, La Femme. I've seen a promo somewhere up on Renderosity, La Femme 1. That was very optimistic. It sounds almost as if La Femme 2 is already on the way. But this is interesting because it's the second poser figure that we get for this dedicated platform that is not developed by SmithMicro. So it's almost like SmithMicro have kind of given up on the whole poser universe. That's kind of what it feels like to me. I don't use poser much, but I know there's a big core fan base, and many of you are still using the Generation 4 figures for that. And it's kind of good to see new life being breathed into poser with new figures. And that, of course, means there's new opportunities for clothing developers and content developers to do something with that new figure. So yeah, that's La Femme, available for free right now on Renderosity. Very interesting. See where that goes. Anyway, today let's do something rather creepy. I've shown you this thumbnail here. This is it. That is the creepy corridor scene that we're going to be building today. So it's yes, indeed, they have, and it's yes, Christina, they have, and it's we don't know where that's going to go, so it'll be interesting to see. So this is the scene we're going to be building today. Very, very creepy corridor scene. I've actually rendered 2 versions of this because when I've uploaded this to Renderosity, to my gallery, it looked fine. But then when I've uploaded it to YouTube as a small thumbnail, it looked extremely dark. So I don't know, it looks okay on the return here to me. It's just supposed to be dark and creepy. So yes, that's what we're going to be doing today. I've got cockroaches here, and I've got a janitor here, and I had this vision for this picture when I was thinking, what am I going to do on Friday for the live stream? What type of scene am I going to build? And I wanted to do something with this corridor. This was freebie from the DAZ Platinum Club that I picked up a while ago, and I thought it would be nice to do something with that. And I had this vision of a janitor kind of standing at the end of the corridor with a very extreme camera perspective there, and something creepy should happen. So I was going to make this more about lighting, and then I thought, wouldn't it be nice if there's something crawling towards him and he doesn't realize it's happening? So imagine this is kind of a facility, and these super intelligent bugs have just broken out, and he's burning the midnight oil, doing the night shift and wiping the floors, and all of a sudden these things start creeping up on him. Very creepy. So I've rendered a second version of this that I made a little bit lighter. for the YouTube thumbnail, and that kind of takes the creepiness out of it. Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure about that. This is something we'll deal with using tone mapping in DAZ Studio. So this darkness here, the light is set up. This is the light here at the top. That will be set up from the scene when we load it in with DAZ Studio, but the darkness really comes with a bit of vignetting on the outsides and some messing with the tone mapping settings. So I'll show you how that works. And then once that was done, and once I had uploaded it, I was thinking, do you know what, actually I like to try out something else that would be more suitable for rendering lots of instances of objects. So these guys here I've just copied, and I'll show you how that works in DAZ Studio as well. But there's a better way of doing it by using a replicator to replicate lots of these guys over the surface of the floor. And there is something that we can use in DAZ Studio, and that makes this. So this is kind of a mixture. It's still a little bit too light for my liking, but you can see all these lots and lots of little critters coming up here. So that is even spookier. One of those things. Biscuits is here. Goedemiddag nach Holland. Very nice that you could make it. Aren't you cooking dinner? You told me last time you're cooking dinner at this time, so I'm glad you could make it. Very nice that you could join us. So this is what we're going to be building, and of course with all these little critters, that's, you know, it's just all very creepy. It just makes your skin crawl, doesn't it? So one of those things. Let's have a look. I'm using DAZ Studio 4.11 today, and in preparation for this I've noticed that I had my graphics card driver wasn't actually working with DAZ Studio 4.11. Well, it was working, but it wasn't rendering as fast as I had hoped it was going to do that. So I had to update my graphics card driver to the latest version from the NVIDIA website. So now I'm running this one here, 417.71. WHQL, whatever that means. So that's what I'm running, and that works with DAZ Studio 4.11. So just a little heads up, if you're trying 4.11 on a Windows system and it's currently not utilizing the GPU, that's what happened for me. The CPU was utilized, but the GPU wasn't utilized. See if you can find your graphics card on nvidia.com and see if there's a latest driver for your operating system. Let's have a quick look at the things that we're going to be using. I was going to put my pointer focus here. Didn't I have a shortcut to that here? This thing, pointer focus, that is just so important because it allows me to show you things like I do on my pre-recorded videos. So let's have a look at the items that we're going to be using. Julia is going to post the links to these items in the chat in a little while, and then you can go and recreate the scene if you like. This is the Confinement Corridor here. It's a DAZ original, and that once was available as a freebie. They didn't bring the beds in, they literally just put the corridors in. It's available as an iRay and a 3D Light version, so it should work in Poser. This is what it looks like, and for my liking that was a little bit too short, so I've taken the corridor and duplicated it and just made it bigger. I'm not actually showing you this because I'm still full screen. What am I doing? This is the stuff you got to tell me. Oh, you're behind, Anya. I'm so sorry. Let me just show you this again. This is the Confinement Corridor here. Yes, that's what I just showed you here. So it didn't come with the beds. That's the beds I was talking about. And for my liking, this wasn't quite long enough. So what I'm going to do is, once I've loaded it in, I'm going to take it, duplicate it, and then just merge it together. That's how that will work. And our camera's going to be here. We're going to make that wall disappear at the bottom here.
I don't see anything.
I still haven't switched, have I? What is it with my sticky fingers here? There we go. Haha. Now I've got it. I'm so sorry. This is one of those things. It's when you have so many monitors to look at. It's just terrible. There we go. This is the Confinement Corridor, and we're going to duplicate that, as I said. So this is the wall and the door that I'm going to make disappear, and the rest of the corridor I'm just going to duplicate. And this is the joining piece here. This piece, we're going to join that piece. Confinement Corridor from DAZ. Also, to make that janitor appear with something to do, we're going to give him the commercial cleaning supplies here. They're only going to be very small. I think I'll give him this mop, one of those props here. This was also a Platinum Club freebie from DAZ, and yeah, it's just a single prop, fairly high poly actually, but we can use it, and it's just something, you know, it just gives him something to do. It doesn't come with poses or anything. It's also DAZ original. And I didn't have a lab coat for my guy, so I'm going to use a Genesis 3 figure, and I'm going to just use the classic trench coat for the Genesis 3 males. And I'll do away with the hair prop, so you see a bald janitor. Very, very simple. I bought this as part of the detective bundle a while ago. And that had a kind of a detective outfit and a camera and a few poses in there as well. And I thought the lab coat is going to double very nicely, or sorry, the trench coat is double very nicely as a lab coat. If the figure is kind of far away, we don't need to see the details there. So we're not going to use any of that outfit. It's just about the trench coat. And then, of course, we have the star of the show, which is the SmithMicro Cockroach. And that's available from Renderosity for a bargain price of $2.10. And it's been on sale for 333 days. Or is that going to be when the sale ends? Grab him now while you still can. I bought this and noticed that the minimum checkout value on Renderosity was actually $3.50. So I had to buy something else. I chose, I believe, a bird also from the SmithMicro library. And then the final thing that I want to just show you briefly that we can use for replicating this guy in the dozens is this thing called Ultra Scatter by none other than Howie Farks. If you've heard of Howie Farks before, it may be because of his amazing Carrara scenes. He makes amazing landscapes for both Carrara and for Vue, and he's kind of fairly recently started doing that in DAZ Studio as well. And he said on the forums once that what he was really missing to create those scenes was a replicator. So he wrote this from scratch. So he's also a script developer. And the funky thing with these things is you basically have one fern plant, and then you tell the replicator, well, make me 12 instances of that. And that's very memory efficient, and you can replicate anything really. He's got two versions, and one of them is called the Pro version. That's a more recent version with more features, and one is called the advanced version, and this is what the thing can do. So Blender has a replicator, Carrara has a replicator, other professional 3D programs have a replicator. DAZ Studio doesn't have that. I believe Poser doesn't have that. But now DAZ Studio, thanks to Ultra Scatter Pro and Howie Farks, has that. There's the advanced version, which has slightly less features, is available for $14.98 right now, or is on sale. Wow, busy chat, guys. I haven't even looked at this. This is amazing. Thank you so much for your involvement. If you have any questions while I'm going along here, please feel free to ask, and Julia is going to be kind enough to shout that out to me. So yes, let's begin with DAZ Studio 4.11. Here it is. And I guess let's start with a sip of coffee, shall we? What coffee are you guys drinking? Let's do that, biscuits. Let's do fluffy kittens. I like it. Yes, I think that's a great idea, because we had a kind of sad pool scene, and then now we have these creepy cockroaches. So let's do a nice fluffy kitten scene. If you know a fluffy kitten model, let me know. Also, thanks, Biscuit. By the way, I've downloaded your blonde hair texture from Patreon. Biscuit, like myself, we're both on Patreon, and Rod is on Patreon as well, by the way. You can, if you're watching and you want to support any of us, please do that. We'd greatly appreciate that. In the chat, you can also support me by super chat. If you want to do a one-off donation, you can click the little $sign on the bottom of the chat, and you can pop something into my tip jar. But Patreon, the good thing about Patreon is we creators can give funky goodies to the audience, and Biscuits just made a blonde hair texture available on her Patreon feed. Very exciting. I'm going to play with that. Perhaps it'll make an appearance next week. Who knows? Let's begin by bringing our creepy corridor scene, and that isn't actually that creepy when you start. So from my smart content tab here, I'm going to go, I believe, into environments. Yes, there it is, and I have the Confinement Corridor. That's what it's called. If I open that under environments, I see two figures. One is the 3D light figure, and one is the iRay figure. I'm going to go with the iRay figure. well, figure, I'll say it's a preset, isn't it? And it comes in like this, and that's just, well, you know, a little bit zoomed in for my liking. So let's zoom out there and have a look at this in its entirety. Biscuits, that's how Super Chat works. You are the best. That is so cool. Biscuits has just demonstrated to us how Super Chat works. Thank you so much for the 99 cents. I appreciate that. It'll top up my coffee next time. Thank you so much. This is awesome. I really appreciate that. This is really nice. So there we go. Tip job works indeed. So the corridor here is a little bit too short, and of course my camera perspective is a little bit too zoomed in. So that's one thing that we're going to fix in a moment. That was actually a tip that Dreamlabs gave me. Dreamlabs, are you here? Are you joining us? Is Dreamlabs in the chat? He's basically one of my neighbors. He lives in Broward. Dreamlabs 3D was one of my Patreon supporters and loyal viewers. He joined me a couple of weeks ago, and we had a little chat going there. And he said, well, if you want to make the camera perspective of the perspective view slightly wider, then you just right-click on the little loop icon here, right-click, and then zoom in and out. And that does not dolly the camera like you would do with the regular mouse wheel. If you scroll the mouse wheel in or out, that physically moves the camera closer or further away from your object. But if you use a right click on this, then it will in fact zoom your perspective view in and zoom it out. And the advantage of that is that you can use that on cameras as well, but the advantage of this is that you can kind of set up your perspective view to something that suits your liking. So I would like to shoot with a wider lens, and usually I would have created a camera first and then tweaked the lens on the camera. Now, thanks to that tip, I can also do that in the perspective view. I really like that. So there we go. Let's select this wall first here. And when I do that, then I go and it's selected here in the scene tab. I can just click the little eye icon and it makes the wall disappear. I'm going to do the same with the door. So click the door and just make that disappear as well. And that lets me now shoot into the corridor, which is very important. So I'll dolly the camera in there a little bit further. And this is technically where our janitor figure is going to stand, in front of that door here. But before I do that, I'm going to also make sure this wall disappears, as well as this wall. And there's also these two security cameras, I guess, that also we're going to make those disappear as well. And that's just temporarily so that we have a corridor that we can easily duplicate. Let's do that. I scroll up in my scene tab here to the very top. I can close the corridor to make it easier for me to do. I'll select that corridor, and then to duplicate it, you head over to the edit menu over here. And on edit, you head over to duplicate, and we've got two options here, duplicate nodes and duplicate node hierarchies. Technically, if you only have a single object like a primitive, then it doesn't really matter which one you use. But if you have something like the corridor that has parented objects to it, then you should use duplicate node hierarchies, and then all the sub items in the hierarchy will also be duplicated, whereas duplicate node only duplicates the one top node and no child nodes on that. So let's select duplicate node hierarchies, and DAZ Studio thinks about it for a second, and we have corridor number 2. And they're now in the exact same place, so we don't really see a difference there right now. But if we go and select corridor 2 and just move that away over here, then we can just have a look at the bit where they both meet. It doesn't have to be super precise, but something along those lines will probably do. I just don't want to see a seam here. Let me just close that down for a second so I can give myself a little bit more room here. I can just about see that they're meeting up here. There, that should be good enough, and that gives me a very long corridor I can now shoot through. There, nicely done. So I'll position my camera somewhat at the at the beginning of the corridor here. And well, that's just my perspective view, so that doesn't really do much for me right now. So let's do a couple of things. First of all, let's lock that camera position in so that we can fine tune it later. Up on create, I'll click and select a new camera, and I will choose the, there we go. I'll choose the default, I'll choose the active view, copy the perspective view here and hit accept, and that'll create a new camera for me here. And that allows me now to select the camera from here and look through it and see if I'm happy. I'll switch on the aspect ratio in a moment so that we know what we're actually going to be rendering. But before we do that, I'll go back to corridor 1 and I'll see if I can switch on the back wall and the security cameras again here. So that's the door at the back, that's the back wall and the front wall. Of course, we don't want that in the way unless you want to. It's, you know, up to you. I don't think I want to do that. I just want a long corridor here. And I also want to have the cameras, the security cameras, which are of no use because they haven't spotted the little critters crawling up on our janitor here. So there we go. That's that. I'm also going to make you aware of something that this is how I like to work. I've got the scene tab up here, but I've got the cameras tab down here. Can you see that? Can I see that? Oh, just about. This is the cameras tab here, and it will show me the camera parameters. You can also access those with the camera selected. Let me close that corridor down again. Oh, interesting. Computer is a little unresponsive this morning. So with the camera selected on the parameters tab, you can see the camera parameters just as well. But I find it useful to have the camera tab open and have those parameters showing there at all times, because of course the parameters menu or the parameters tab is context sensitive. So if I choose something else in my scene like the corridor, then you'll see that those options have all changed now. So I find it very useful to have the camera options displayed on a tab that isn't changing them. So if I now go ahead and want to switch on and off the headlamp, for example, I can do that no matter what is selected in my scene. So it's my quick tip for you this morning. It maybe makes your life easier when you're working with DAZ Studio. So let's bring up the aspect ratio so that we know what we're rendering. I'm going to render something along the lines of a 16:9 image. So we'll find that under render settings, under general. And at the very top here, we have the dimensions preset for global presets. And since we're only having one camera, I believe that'll be enough. So pick anything you like from the list. In my case, I'm going to use Full HD or HD 720p. Maybe HD 720p. Why don't I do that? And once I've selected that, this is now the dimensions. These are the dimensions that are actually going to be rendered, 1280 by 720. But I don't appear to see that in my main viewport yet. That is because we can head over here to this little 3-4 line icon here, the context icon for the active viewport. Select that and show the aspect frame. Select that option, and then you'll see that we can see a white border around the area that'll make it into a final image. So that allows me to now frame up my camera accurately. I will do that with the camera selected up here in the viewport. Let's say we want to have something like that. To make it a little bit more dramatic, I can head over to my camera tab and drop down the focal length a little bit. So it's currently set to 50, which is kind of the equivalent to a regular normal lens, I guess they call it, in 35mm. If you drop that down to something much smaller, well, not much smaller, maybe like 30-28, something like that, we'd get an extreme wide angle. Don't go too far below that, because otherwise you get really crazy results like this, but it depends on what you want to shoot really. I think I'm going to be happy with something along those lines to make that perspective really weird and eerie. And yes, something along those lines, I think. We'll see. We can always fine tune it later. I'd really like to have a central point of interest at the back of the tunnel, somewhere there. So something along those lines. Oh, wow. That is so nice of you. Thank you so much, Christina. That is phenomenal. Christina is one of my extremely loyal Patreon supporters. So she's supporting me on a monthly basis already. And so should you, by the way. And she's given me €5 extra this month. This is awesome. Christina, thank you so much. It's so appreciated. I can't tell you how encouraging it is when this happens. Guys, I love you all. This is phenomenal. This is great. I really love it. Right, 2 live streams a week now. This is amazing. Julia and I are already hatching plans to add a gaming live stream to our weekly schedule. We'll see how that comes along. It really depends on the... yes, it is. I drink... what am I drinking this week? It's a Cuban coffee. It's a special kind of... I'll show you next time. It's a very, very nice, full-bodied thing that's being roasted right here in Miami. It's called, it's not Pilon, it's the other one. There's La Llave and there is Bustelo, that's the one. Thank you, Julia. It's Bustelo, Cafe Bustelo. That is exactly what's in my coffee cup. Thank you so much, Christina. Awesome. So there's one other thing I'd like to add to the creepiness of the scene, and that is something Biscuits probably knows about this. It's something sometimes called a Dutch angle, and this happens when you tilt the camera on its axis to the left or the right. Don't overdo that. It is something, I believe there's a shortcut for that in any of these things. If you guys know it, please let me know. I only know it. Is it? Maybe I can try. Is it kind of a right click on this guy? No, that's not it. It's is it right click on here? No, that's also not it. I believe it's easier to do this. It's called banking. It's called camera banking, and we can do that under the parameters tab with the camera selected, and it's just under the regular display options here. No, not display. It's the general options under transform rotation. And it is literally the way you translate, I believe, is it the Z-axis? No, that's not it. The Y-axis? No, that's not it. Is it the Y? It's the rotation, first of all. There we go. My goodness. It's not that either. It is no, it's going to be Z. There we go. It's Z. That's how you make the camera Dutch angle. I should have researched that, really, shouldn't I? Sometimes that happens when you fiddle around. So this is the camera now on the tripod being moved left or right like this. So it's literally tilted to the left and right. And you call that Dutch angle. And if you overdo that like so, then it looks a bit like a Stanley Kubrick movie, and that's not what we want. That's just way too much. If it goes towards the 45-degree angle, that's not good. But if you do it in 5 to 10 degrees, something like that, just let it creep in there ever so slightly. It adds to the really creepy effect there. So let's do that. Camera a little bit Dutch. There we go. That's it. So that's our camera setup, and before we do anything else, let's just save this, shall we? Just in case something, the inevitable happens, as they say. Let's put that and call it Corridor Stream. There we go. Super. Let's switch on the iRay viewport right now and just see what that looks like right now. I thought you can, Cajun Beauty. I just forgot what I need to, which combination it is. It was some kind of right click, middle click, something. Do you remember which one that was? I don't remember really. By the way, I suggest you not do that in the viewport, because you want your viewport to be kind of regular, and only do that on the camera when you're rendering, because otherwise it may confuse me. I mean, it has confused me in the past. Yes, exactly. It gives that dynamic vibe, doesn't it? So first of all, we see that we have way too much light in our scene now. And that's just the nature of the fact that all our cameras have a headlamp feature switched on. And it's currently set to auto, but if we switch that off, then the headlamp, that's currently kind of a light bulb mounted on top of our camera, a bit like the guys from news gathering have. They have got this video camera with an LED light, or back in the day there was a proper halogen light mounted on the top, and that shines right into people's faces. And if we switch that off, that main light is going to be gone, and we see more or less just the scene light. We have an indoor scene, so there's not much light that comes in from the outside, because we have a second light source in our scene, which is of course the IBL, the image-based lighting. And we can switch that off. We don't really need it. We can see it through these doors here. We can switch that off by heading over to the render settings, to environment. And there it is. The environment map is currently set to 2, and this is the image that DAZ give us, so that things like reflectivity, bits and bobs show up. But we can set that to 0, and that will switch that off as well. So now we only have the lights that come with the scene, and they are surface lights, so they're mesh lights. They're not parametric lights, they're only mesh lights, and the developer was kind enough to put them in here. So these surfaces here, they are emitting light, and that's the light we're getting for the corridor. I'm going to leave it at that for now. I don't want to mess with the lighting too much. I want to set up my scene. Let's set up a couple of critters, and let's set up our character in the back corridor there. Notice though that if I go back, and with my camera still selected, if I go back to the texture or the smooth shaded viewport, I only see a completely dark scene now, and that's because the headlamp is now switched off. So if I wanted to see something else here again, I'd either have to switch on my headlamp again, so then I shine a light right in there, or I can leave that switched off and drop a linear point light into my scene. And that's just for the OpenGL engine that now brings us this image here, so that I can set things up. Notice when I switch this over to my perspective view, I still have a headlamp, and that's not something I can switch off in the perspective view. I can do that in my render settings. Again, I believe it's under general. If it's not under general, it's somewhere else. Don't quote me on it. There was a way to switch the auto headlamp feature off here. There we go. It is actually under general. It's under when no scene lights. So we only have the option to switch it off, or when there's no scene lights, or never, or when there's no scene lights in there. So as soon as I drop a scene light in now, for example, then this will this headlamp from the perspective view will also go away. So I can either switch that to never, which, look at that, actually it only applies to cameras, doesn't apply to the perspective view. Ignore what I just said there. I'm going to do something and drop a point light into the scene so that I don't have to switch on and off my camera's headlamp all the time. So let's go and create a new linear point light. Difference between a point light and a linear point light, by the way, is the fact that the point light has a fall off, like a real life light. It only reaches so far, but the linear point light doesn't have a fall off, so it shines kind of forever, kind of like the sun. The sun, even though the sun technically has a fall off, we can't detect it here on Earth. So let's do that. Put that in. It comes in right at the back here, and if I'm lucky, I can just drop that right into the middle of my corridor so that I can see stuff I'm doing. I'm going to make that unselectable with that little, next to the little arrow icon here. Just click on that until the little X comes up, and that's that. I'm not going to mess with my camera. I'm going to go into my perspective view here, and I'm going to place my character here. So have I done myself a disfavor here with the linear point light? I may have done. Yes, I may have done. Let's put that linear point light in at a later time, because otherwise I can't really see what I'm doing through the perspective view. It's good for the inside of the corridor. I may have to do that again there. Well, to place the character, I'm going to make part of the corridor disappear again. So the back part of the corridor, maybe this whole bit, let's make that disappear. Our janitor needs to be somewhere over here. We'll place him correctly in a moment. On the Smart Content tab, I'm going to go and head over to not filter by context. Otherwise, it'll only show me whatever is selected currently. I'll head over to Figures, and I'll go and select my regular Genesis 3 male, perhaps. You're very welcome, Rod. There's a whole new chapter on in the DAZ Studio 101 series that's coming up that's going to deal with lighting, specifically with Iray lights as well as with 3D lights. So the parametric lights work very similar, but the way you preview them are different. So I've been thinking about how I'm going to best make that clear to viewers, and I've decided on making several installments about the lighting in that series, because I think clarifying lights in general is going to be helpful. Lights will also lead on to surfaces and the rendering engine, and that will involve inevitably to make that clear for 2 render engines. So I'm still working it out of my head, which is why I didn't do the last episode last week as I thought I was going to do. It's still kind of, work in progress. With my Genesis male figure selected, let's head over to, let's now filter this by context and give the man a pose. Perhaps from the general pose library. Something, was it maybe this? Is that going to work? So I want him to be able to kind of hold a kind of broom somehow. Yeah, maybe that's going to be enough, and I'll just bend his arm slightly to the side there. I think I'll do that. Yeah, I think we can start working with that pose. Did I give him any shoes? Yeah, let's give him shoes as well. Let's have a look at the wardrobe here. That's the classic trench coat, still with Genesis 3 selected. There's a whole outfit here. We'll give him that. That comes with shoes. There we go. And it also might come with different materials. Yes, for Iray and for 3D Light, I believe. I don't know which one was the default, so I guess with my outfit selected here, do we have a complete outfit? Oh, no, we don't, do we? Okay, so the trench coat. Let's do that, and then we have the pants. Make sure that the pants are also Iray, and the rest we don't really see. I mean, we have the shoes here. Let's give them some work shoes. There we go. That should do the trick. We won't see the shirt. We don't have to apply that. Let's see if we can bring in, next to our man, let's see if we can bring in some of the commercial cleaning supplies. I don't really know where they're hiding, so I'm going to go and search for them just by typing cleaning into here. And with a bit of luck, I need to select all products, and that'll show me wherever this text string is hiding, and there are my cleaning supplies. I still don't know where they are. It could be under utilities, could be under props. I don't know. It's probably under props. I'll load them from here. Sometimes the smart content is a great idea. Sometimes it is not. But there we go. So double click the cleaning supplies. I don't actually know if they have Iray materials or not. They may not actually. They may be a rather old prop. Under materials. Here we do have Iray materials. That's cool. I like that. Next question. Where are they? There we go. And I want that to be somewhere close to my janitor friend here. He probably needs to be... Yeah, well, I've noticed that when I was building this scene, the cleaning supplies are actually fairly high poly. They have a higher polygon count than they actually need. So my computer really doesn't like that. So let's move my Genesis friend over here and turn him around like so. So ideally for a small prop like this, I'd really like something with less polygons here. My computer is really struggling here. So perhaps just for this demo, because my computer is streaming as well, I might just not render the cleaning supplies. So I would probably just put them off to the side here a little bit, and then twist them around so that we see them on an angle that he's kind of using them. Maybe turn them around like so. And that was my original idea. If this is going to be too cumbersome for my computer, which it looks like it is, I might just take them out and place them last. It's one of those things that it's a nice tip if you're working with a large scene and you find that one or two props really drag things down, or one or two lights, additional lights that really make working difficult. Don't be afraid to go, well, yeah, I'll do that later, and get the base of the scene ready so that you can work better in your viewport. I might actually do that. So just for demo purposes, this is where the cleaning supplies are going to go later. And now I'm going to go and delete them again. There we go. Let's just use the guy as a prop here, and we know what the final result is going to look like. Now let's bring the corridor back and see if our man will look correctly in situ there. Yes, I think he does. So here he is mopping away. If you want to, so this is something else that's sometimes overlooked when you build scenes. I've just turned him around like this, and I really like that. But now imagine you want to move the guy with the grid slightly further to the right, exactly to the right. It doesn't seem to be an option to do that right now. I can use the manipulator to move him kind of 45 degrees forwards to the right, or 45 degrees forwards to the left. But I can't seem to move the guy just straight left or straight right. What's going on there? Well, it's in applications like Blender, we can set how the manipulator is, where the manipulator is pointing. If he's using the local coordinates, like local to the object, or the world coordinates. And we can do that in DAZ Studio as well. So that is under draw settings, I believe. And that is, I don't have that pane open here anywhere. I don't see it. If we want to do that, go ahead, head over to Window and Panes, and there should be the draw settings here. And if you select that, then a new little tab comes open that you can dock somewhere maybe on the bottom here, and with whatever object is selected, you can select the general thing. The general, you know what? It's my brain is frazzled today. It isn't actually the draw settings; it's the tool settings. So forget the draw settings. Let's close that pane again. Let's try that again with the tool settings. So let's try that again under Windows Panes. Oh, there we go. At the bottom it is tool settings. Let's do that. So tool settings will have that, and here at the top there it is, use local coordinates, and that's exactly what we're seeing with our Genesis figure here. So if we switch that to world coordinates, watch what happens to the 3D manipulator. That aligns itself now with the grid, and that's a very cool way of switching from local to world coordinates and back. So now I can move my guy left and right. Yes, I guess that's Rod. I think that's the same idea. I think in Blender you have to set it differently, but yeah, in Poser that may well be possible. So yeah, it's the same idea. However you want to move the figure. There is something else that's often overlooked on this 3D manipulator gadget. There's this little triangle here, and if you hold that down and move a figure, then it'll basically lock the figure in two axes. So if I do that, I can move him in the I guess it's the XZ axis. So I can use that as well and move him around kind of more arbitrarily, but I will never change the height. And that's what these little white triangles are for. That may come in handy as well. So with my guy selected, let's go back and see what the rest of the scene looks like. And oh yeah, of course, bring in some critters now. Crazy stuff. Let's bring in some cockroaches. So the cockroaches, let's see where they're coming in and where we need to move them. The cockroaches, by the way, they're not smart content, so they're very old. They're Poser content, so they'll come up under the content library tab. And in that, they're not even going to be in DAZ Studio formats. They're going to be in Poser formats. And I believe I've got them in my Renderosity folder. They could be figures, insects. There we go. Haha, here he is, my friend, the cockroach. Crazy stuff. Let's bring one of them in. And again, the cockroach is relatively high poly, so I don't really need a figure that's that detailed, but I guess, you know, beggars can't be choosers. Let's move the cockroach right to the very front here. You can also work with two viewports. So on my auxiliary viewport, I could switch that over to the camera so that I get a little view of my camera. If that's currently not illuminated, we can switch the headlamp on, and then I get a better view of where that cockroach is going to appear while I'm mangling with my perspective view here in the front. That's not so bad. That's not so bad. We're getting there. The cockroach is large. It's not really to scale. It's not going to be that bad. Hey, just remember, he's just numbers in a text file, really, isn't he? That's all the cockroach is. So in order to, we can see that the little critter here, das possierliche Tierchen, as we said in Germany, this guy, he's not to scale. So he's looking at us. So I like for him to look at the at our janitor. So let's go onto our parameters tab and quickly rotate him around. Have I got the complete cockroach? Yes. Let's rotate him by 180 degrees. There we go. That looks good. The only other thing that I want to do now is that his antennae are curled up, and they haven't really rigged him. They just morphed these antennae, and the way to adjust them is to open the cockroach, open the metathorax, and then you have somewhere on the abdomen 2, 3, 4. No, that's not it. It was here somewhere. I don't know, is it the pronotum maybe? The head, there we go. Pronotum leads to head, and then we have the two antennae that we can now, they have just put lots and lots of antennae bits together to make that, to make his feelers kind of curl there. But I believe the morphs we need are literally in his antenna left and right. So with one of them selected, in the morphs tab, we have this bend all slider here, and if we undo that, then he does this. So you can, with S bend and bend all, you can kind of animate these things properly. And if you really want to go to town, you can, on the duplicates that you create with the cockroach, you can have different values here, one for every one, so that they all look a little bit different. That's how you do that. So the same for the right antenna. Let's go and uncurl that a little bit, like so. Whoops. It's alive. It's alive. And then you can make him, move him side to side. Look at that. You can do all kinds of funky things with this. If you can see that on the screen here, I can see that because I'm kind of zoomed in here. I don't want to creep you all out. It's just this, you know. I should do this at 2 in the morning. This stream. That'd be much easier. And then there's the spiral bend. I guess you can do all kinds of things. So let's you know, twist all this. You got that. You can do all kinds of things with this. I'm looking forward to animating this little guys. You get a lot for your $2.10 there. There. That should do. Is he? Is he perhaps bent a little bit too much? I mean, I don't know that much about cockroaches myself. Do they really look like that, or do they need to? Does he need to walk like that? I don't think I've done that in my real scene. I think I've just, yeah, he's got larger hind. Oh my god, he has large hind legs, doesn't he? Yeah, maybe he just walks like that. That is possible. I don't know. I think in my original scene I had some of the legs just poke into the floor here. We can probably do that and just twist him over like that a little bit. So that should do the trick. Perhaps we're going to turn him to the side a little bit. And now I'm going to imagine that lots of them are crawling around the floor. So to do that, we can, with one cockroach selected, we do the same thing as we did before. We head over to Edit, Duplicate Node Hierarchies. And that will have created cockroach number 2. Move him over here and then go and turn him slightly further this way. Move him slightly over there. Das possierliche Tierchen. edit duplicate, do that again, and just create as many of them as you want. So remember that every time you make a duplicate, it'll increase the geometry in your scene. So there may be the point where your computer will say, hey, I'm actually getting really, really slow now. And that's where this other concept comes in, which is called instancing. So the difference between a physical copy and an instance is that an instance is more like a pointer to a location in memory. So think of the geometry and the textures as some location in your computer's memory. And if you go and create another copy of that, then what you'll end up doing is you allocating a new portion of memory, and eventually your memory is going to run out either on your GPU or on your physical computer's memory. And to alleviate that, you can create instances, and they're less memory hungry. They're literally just a memory location that says, hey, for the content of whatever you're gonna show here, comma, render engine, comma, look at that memory location. And you can do that like 10 or 20 or 1,000 times, and that's much easier on the computer's memory or on the GPU's memory. So I think I'm going to create about 10 of these little guys here. For the large puppies here, and then I'll create a few instances with the ultrascatter plugin. And remember, you can use ultrascatter for things other than just bugs as well. Very important to remember. So if these guys are now on the corridor here for now, let me create a duplicate of maybe of this guy here. Cockroach number 2, yeah, that's his name in the end credits in a minute. Cockroach number 2. And this guy I want to duplicate and put him on the wall, or perhaps on the ceiling, something like that. So with the X rotation here, let's go and rotate him that way. Is it the X rotation? No, it's the Z rotation, isn't it? Yes. -90, and let's put him onto the wall. I'm just going to put 1 or 2 guys on the wall. And they can, of course, walk on the ceiling as well. So perhaps we'll put him here, half on the door. Excellent. Make sure they actually go right into the wall, or they at least touch the wall. There's nothing worse than having these shadows underneath an object, and you can clearly see that the object is hovering, and that of course happens when we set up scenes and we haven't properly looked at them in all viewports or from all directions. Happens to us all. Oops. There, so maybe I'll create one more. Oh, have I now moved cockroach number 2? Yeah, cockroach number 2, not his friend the duplicate. So I'll create one more here and I'll put him here. And he should be now cockroach number 8. Yes. I like it. Starring cockroach number 8. This little square bit here that zooms in onto the selected object. That's a helpful way to frame something up that you want to mess with. So in my case, Mr. Cockroach here. You can also vary the scale of these guys. You don't just have to leave them all at the same size. So I could make this guy on the scale parameter here, on the overall scale, I can just make him slightly smaller. That may be a good idea, just to get a bit of scale variation in there in all of these guys. So some may be a little bit smaller, others may be a little bit larger. And it's one of those things that the scatter plugin can also do for us. So that's creepy enough. Let's have a look at our camera here. That's what it looks like. I suppose we could also do with a few cockroaches here on the right hand side, but you get the picture. You get the picture. Let's have a look at what this looks like in the iRay preview. And oh yes, with my camera 1 selected here, let me just switch that headlamp off, so otherwise it gets a bit too light here. Oh yes, there are flying ones, aren't there? Oh. It's funny that sometimes we call cockroaches here in America, we call them German cockroaches, don't we? And it's bizarre because when I was living in Germany, I never came across a cockroach. Actually, no, I'm lying. I used to live in Hamburg in the red light district, and it was a skyscraper, the 15th floor skyscraper at the northern end of the Reeperbahn in Hamburg. It's kind of an infamous. It isn't really, but I used to live there, and I had one of those desks where the keyboard was slid underneath the desk, so I could slide it out. And then I had my laptop on the top here, and there was this one evening, and I was unsuspecting, kind of had my hands underneath my desk, and I just rested my hands on the keyboard thinking, what am I going to write next? And I felt something like a tickle on my finger, and I was thinking, what is that? And there was this cockroach sitting on my keyboard and just going with his little feelers, and I thought, oh, this is creepy. Oh, anyway, yes. Hence, I need to now build cockroach scenes in DAZ Studio. Don't ask me why. So let's deal with, before we deal with the many other cockroaches, and to bring that topic around something technical that's less creepy. Let's have a look at the lighting here. I didn't deal with the lighting yet, so this is just the lighting we have here provided by the corridor. Actually, before we continue, let me select all these cockroaches and then put them into a group. I think I'm going to do that. It's going to be so that we can manage them all as a whole thing and hide them all if we needed to do that. So with the cockroaches selected, I believe I can do create a new group, and if I do that, we can say roaches, and that now has put all our cockroaches together in one handy menu. So if I wanted to ever hide them all, it's just one click and we go, haha, we have a roach-free scene. Clear corridor. Whew, that's nice. You can't really do that when you parent things to one another, but if you put something into a group, then you can hide the group and then everything in that group disappears. That's kind of nice. Yes, it is Biscuit. It is very creepy. So to make this look even creepier, we could go into the corridor here, and with the surface selection tool, we can select one of these surfaces like the ceiling here. Remember, we have to do that twice. We have it here and we have it also here. So perhaps we'll deal with the front ceiling here first. So actually, we have the lights as well. So select the lights. On the surfaces tab, we have a tab called the light bulb, and in it we find an emission tab here, and this is something where we can now adjust the color temperature and the brightness of those lights. So we could do that. We could make that a bit darker. Emission color is literally the color of the light. So currently we're setting this to white, which is fine. Emission temperature is something, I believe the default, if we reset that to the default 6500, it's kind of a slightly bluish daylight kind of color temperature. And anything below that will be slightly more orangey yellow, and anything above that will be more blue. So that's how we can give it a kind of a subtle color twist there. I believe 5000 was a good starting point there, or even below that. That just changes the color temperature a little bit. But if you want to go to the extremes, you can also select the emission color here and pick something drastic. I mean, I don't know, maybe green, and then that'll make the whole scene be illuminated in green. Just this front part here, by the way, not the back part, because remember, that's a separate corridor, and we need to apply the same value to that if we wanted to have the same light effect here. Just wanted to show you that, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to leave it here at whatever it was before, something along the lines of 5000. Doesn't really matter that much. Along those lines will be fine. To adjust the actual brightness, we can use the luminance slider here, and that's represented in a variety of values, whatever you're familiar with most. So the developer set it to kilo candles per square meters, and not exactly something I'm personally familiar with. But the good news is that if the current value is 350, then anything less than that will be a darker light, and anything more than that will be a brighter light. And if we wanted to make it creepier, perhaps we'll put this to 100. That's one way of doing it. That just gives us less light in the scene. I might actually do that, because then I can leave more light where my subject is here and less light where the critters are. So that's one thing, that's one way that you can do that. And the other way, as promised, is of course the tweaking in the tone mapping settings, and that's under render settings. Let's have a look at that quickly, just as a hint of how else you can mess with your scene. So under render settings, there's environment here, above environment, there's tone mapping here, and you get all these little sliders here. And I believe one of my viewers said that the other day to me, hey, you can also change film properties or camera properties on the tone mapping tab. And that's not actually correct, because technically the way tone mapping works is a bit like how you would develop a digital negative file in Photoshop, if you're familiar with that process. Some cameras shoot raw image files, and some cameras shoot JPEG files. Some cameras shoot both side by side. And the difference really between those two formats is that a JPEG is an image that we can look at right away. So it contains the pixel data, basically raw pixel data. Each pixel has a specific color, and all that makes up our picture. But a raw image file doesn't really work that way. There is, if you imagine a digital camera, you've got your image sensor that receives the light, and you press a button and you read out that data. And that data isn't actually an image yet. That's just lightness and darkness, kind of just raw image data that some processing engine has to do something with to arrive at something we can look at, like a JPEG image. And I believe Canon call this the Digic whatever engine. That's kind of the thing that makes it happen. Some chip that does some calculation. Anyway, when you do that on the fly, you don't have that much of adjustment opportunities. But if you do that from the raw image data, things like Photoshop or any other raw image manipulating engine can go to work in a much more specific way. So sometimes you can bring highlights back, sometimes you can apply a different white balance retrospectively, and so forth. And that's what this process does. And I'm telling you all this because it's very similar with render engines. You have the actual engine that gives you the raw image data from whatever comes out of here, but that's not an image just yet. That's basically just our 3D objects translated into a bunch of raw data. And then you apply this tone mapping stage at the end, and that applies the correct contrast and corrects the sometimes corrects the exposure and the white balance and all that. So that's why we've got so many options under tone mapping here. Different render engines work very differently there. So iRay has this kind of all integrated in one thing, but if you're familiar with Lux Render, for example, that's available for Poser and for DAZ Studio as I believe the Reality plugin by the wonderful Paolo Ciccone, I believe is his name. He's been instrumental in bringing the Lux Render open source rendering engine to DAZ Studio and to Poser. That works by applying that literally as a second step. So you can literally pause your render and adjust tone mapping settings and then continue the render, so you don't have to re-render your image. And that's very handy. So the iRay sadly doesn't work that way, and you've got a 14-hour render like Rod the other day, then you're not happy with the tone mapping settings, you have to re-render that for 14 hours, and it's really, really cumbersome to do that. So yes, tone mapping, very important stage. So in our case, we've got several options that we can do here. One I like to employ is vignetting. And that's not so much a color correction, but it does make the image darker, and it emulates what cameras sometimes have. They have these flaws that on the outsides, on the edges of your sensor, you don't receive as much light on very open apertures usually than in the center of your lens. So if we crank that up just a little bit, don't go overboard here. If I go overboard like 10, I can see a real hole here in my scene. And that's not really what I'm looking for. I just want to darken this a little bit. So you get this outside vignetting here, and that's a bit too much for my liking. Yet it darkens the scene, so it does make it all creepy. You can apply that in Photoshop as well, of course, but it's nice to be able to do that in the rendering engine. So I just want to kind of hint at that, maybe with a value of 3 or 4. And I'm mentioning this first before we do any other color correction adjustments, because it does have an effect on the whole image. So from 0 to 2 here, 0 was the original value, we get quite a bit of darkening here. So if we apply that, that makes the image a little bit darker. and creepier. You're very welcome, Angel. Yes, exactly. And usually it's faster, Christina, to process scenes in Photoshop afterwards because I just don't have the time as well. When I've got a good render and I'm thinking, hey, I can do that depth of field or that color correction easier in Photoshop just because it's quicker, then I tend to do that in Photoshop as well. But sometimes if you're building the image, then it's nice to be able to build some of the basics in. So yeah, it's something to play around with. Likewise, if you're kind of happy with the lighting and you just want to have the contrast a little bit darker, there's the gamma slider at the bottom. And that works just, can you see that here? Gamma slider, there we go. That works just as you'd expected. A higher gamma makes a softer picture and a lower gamma makes a flatter picture. So if I crank that up to just something extreme like this, then I see that the gamma curve is now much softer and the scene appears a little bit lighter. And likewise, so 2.2 is the default here. If I put that down to 1.5, then I get a much harder contrast. And that's maybe a little bit too much for me already. Actually, let me just go and make that a bit bigger here, so for the benefit of the viewers. So I think maybe 1.5 is a bit too much. Perhaps I'm going to try 1.7. And we're kind of getting there. Maybe 1.6. And of course, you can then you can brighten up the lights again if that's too dark for you or anything. But that's, we're getting there. It's just kind of just a demonstration here. You can do something with the blacks as well. So if we go and reset the gamma and leave the gamma as it was before at 2.2, you can also crush the blacks. And 0.2 is the default. If we make that lower, then we get a much more washed out picture. We're basically lifting the blacks up. So this is essentially the curve that you look at in Photoshop. That's kind of exposes the curve sometimes as well there, and that's the bottom end of the curve that you're messing with. So if you set that to something like 0.4, then you see that the black values are kind of literally crushed, and you get less detail in the darker scenes, in the darker parts of your scene. But likewise, we've got the same thing going with the highlights. I can burn the highlights. If I crank that up, then I get this. I get less detail in the white bits there. Sometimes doesn't make the scene lighter. It just creates a different type of effect. I just thought I'd want to show you that. And one other thing that's important about adjusting the brightness of the image are these settings. These settings at the top here. So there's exposure value, shutter speed, f-stop, film ISO. So they all work hand in hand, and they work exactly like you'd expect them from a film camera. So let's take the f-stop here without that doing anything to the depth of field, mind you. It's currently set to 8. If I set that to 16, then I'm closing the aperture and I'm letting half the amount of light onto my sensor or onto my film that I did before. And hence, when I change that, the exposure value also changes. So if I put that to 4, I'm now letting twice the amount of light onto my film, and hence my scene gets brighter. And again, the exposure value changes. So I don't really think in exposure values. I think more in f-stops and shutter speeds and all that. So that's why I'm more familiar with those things, or ISO, film ISO. So they're basically all related. So if I put my f-stop back to the default of 8 and I want to achieve the same effect that I just had, make the scene brighter, I could just have my film ISO and change it from the default 100 to 50. And if I do that, to 200. Yes, very good, there we go. That makes my scene just as bright as it was with an f-stop of 4, because now the sensitivity of my film is now twice as intense, and twice as intense as 200 would be 400. That makes my image even brighter. So there we go. That's another way of adjusting brightness in the image. And the last thing would be shutter speed. So if I put that to reset again, shutter speed would be, if I'd expose my image twice as long, that would be maybe a 60th of a second. So let's try 60. That should mean my image is bright again, and so forth. So in my case, perhaps I'll say 250 to make it dark. But now I'm not quite happy with the gamma again, so perhaps I'm now going to make my gamma a bit harder. And that makes my scene, I don't know, creepy dark, maybe even too dark. Let me just put that back to just back to reset that. And perhaps I'm also going to go back to the surfaces here, to my light surfaces, and make that slightly brighter again, so that I get that kind of harsh light effect there, like it was before, essentially. So I believe the luminance value here was 350. Now it's maybe a bit too much here. Perhaps I'm going to try 200. I think that's a good kind of starting point. I'm looking at this on several monitors here, and yes, it really depends on which device you're watching this on. I've got one Mac monitor that has a very hard gamma, so the blacks look really, really black. And I've got kind of a dirt cheap monitor here, and the blacks look kind of still, no matter how black they always look washed out. So, but then YouTube goes ahead and compresses everything. And so perhaps we've found a good middle ground here from what I can see. Now, the depth of field that I've shown you in the final image, I haven't done in DAZ Studio, for once because it was faster to do it in Photoshop. I just applied a small iris blur around the center of my image here, and then I let Photoshop apply something like a 5 or 10 pixel slight blur around it. I've shown you how to do that in a video I've made the other day, also thanks to a tip from Christina, by the way. It's called How to Do the Depth of Field in Photoshop. Maybe Julia can dig that out and post it in the chat. That's how I did the depth of field. I didn't do that in DAZ Studio because I've got such a short focal length in the scene that it's very difficult to get that depth of field exactly right. So usually to employ the way this is drawn in DAZ Studio, it's much easier if you zoom in about 40-50 millimeters or above. That's very easy to then create a depth of field there. But if it's a very wide angle lens, that doesn't really work that well. So we're kind of getting to a good picture here. Let me just do one other thing before we bring this to a close. I don't want to make this too long either. I tend to go on a bit. It's one of those I can't help it. There's just so much I want to talk about. So there we go. Before we leave, let me show you how to do this ultra scatter replicator effect for the cockroaches. So that is something I've only recently explored, and it is something we maybe just duplicate this cockroach here, and so that we have one extra guy. I'm going to duplicate the node hierarchies here, and this is going to be a much smaller cockroach. So once duplicated, I'm going to go and take him perhaps out of this group, so that we have a standalone cockroach. We're not in with the Genesis figure. Come on, pop it in here. There we go, perfect. So now I have a standalone cockroach underneath here, cockroach number 9. I'm going to rename him into small roach perhaps, and I'm going to scale him accordingly. So I'm going to switch away from the iRay viewport here now, and I'm going to go back to, should I do texture shaded, or perhaps I'm going to go smooth shaded, and I'm going to go to my perspective view again. And with my small cockroach selected, I'm going to just move him slightly further over here. And also, just to be able to work a little bit better, I'm going to switch off my aspect frame just for now. Less clutter is more. I can even switch off all my other roaches here. And perhaps I'm even going to switch off a corridor or two in a moment. We'll see about that. Let's twist him around a little bit like so, and we'll frame him up and make him much smaller. So either with a little cube in the middle, I can just go and make him much smaller. Those are kind of smaller critters here. Let's see if well, now he's hovering here. I don't want that. Let's make sure he's touching the ground, very important. And the way the replicator works really in pretty much all applications is that you select a source object and you select a destination object, and you tell the replicator, hey, this source object, please replicate that 150, 200, 4,000 times over the surface or over the volume of another object. And in my case, I want to use something called a surface replicator, and that replicates this little guy all over the floor. I'm not sure actually, I don't think the floor is defined, and if it is, then it'll be in 2 parts. So I think the easiest way for me to operate here is to create a new primitive, which we're going to hide in a moment. And we're going to go, and y positive is good, 2 meters is also good. Let's bring that in. That's my plane here. And perhaps with the both corridors switched off, let me zoom in on that plane here. That's, well, actually bring that into the center. So the plane is now I'm gonna stretch that up so that it would fill my whole corridor, the ground plane of my corridor here. And so that needs to happen much further. So I don't want the cockroaches to go and reach the guy, our main character. I want them to kind of stop before here. So let's maybe make that a bit bigger and just go do that. So all the small guys will be up to there. It also needs to be a little bit wider. Something like that. And now with my corridor selected again, I can go and see if that is now too wide or whatnot. Yeah, it is a little bit too wide. So make that a bit slimmer, just so that it fills out the whole 2 corridors here. I'm not going to show the plane later. I'm just going to make sure this is where the replicator can go to work at. That's cool. I like that. So now to utilize the replicator here, we're going to be able to see this quite nicely here. The replicator is a script, literally, and with the small cockroach selected, you can head over to the content library tab. I don't think it comes up in the smart content. I haven't found that in DAZ Studio formats, which really needs to be clearing out. There's scripts and Ultra Scatter Pro. That's why I've got mine. And it comes with good documentation, which is fairly in-depth. But for our purposes, it's going to be really easy to just, with the cockroach selected, double-click that Ultra Scatter Pro script, and then it'll come up with this. And on it, we have one button that's missing a description. In fact, whichever one you click's missing a description. It's an early version, I guess. I guess Howie is working hard on fixing that. Shout out to New Zealand from my man Howie Farks there, by the way. Very, very nicely done, this thing. With the first one selected, that usually reads surface, and that's kind of what we need. That's the first one that comes in here. There's the target object, which is so the source object is the one that's selected. The target object in our case is the plane. If it would have sub objects, you can set those here. And now you can set the number of instances per or iteration. So in my case, I think a number of 20,000 cockroaches. Nah, it's gonna be too much. Let's try 200 to begin with. We could scatter them around right now. In fact, let's do that and see what happens. DAZ Studio thinks about it for a moment, and then we have lots of cockroaches here. Can you see that? With that much more geometry now in the scene, or that many more instances, DAZ is, or my computer is struggling here a little bit. But you can see what's happened here. You've got all these cockroaches now. Oh, actually, there we go. We've got all these cockroaches now looking at us. I guess the wide shot is probably the best view. So lots and lots of cockroaches. But there's 2 flaws with this issue. And for one, they are now turned. That's another bug that I haven't quite worked out how to avoid. Even though the cockroach source object was facing the correct way, now that they're replicated, they're all facing the wrong way. The other thing that I can tell is that they appear to be all lined up in exactly the same fashion. I mean, they're randomized, but none of them they're all the same size and they're all facing exactly the same direction. So the way to change that is with the Ultra Scatter object selected, you can just double click the script again and it'll pre-populate itself with the values that you had just set. So right now we still have our 200 iterations, we have the plane as the object and so forth, but we can do a bit more with that. So there's distribution, scaling and rotation. So distribution we're just going to leave alone. You can do funky things with it, that not all objects are replicated at the outsides of the plane. You can add maps and all that. So it's a very, very intense little script, this. But if you head over to scaling, you have the random scaling option, and this is the overall scaling here at the top. You can say from, let's say, 25% to 130%. So that means all my instances are now going to be replicated slightly smaller, slightly bigger, and anything in between. So that gives very much of a size variation there. And the other thing I want to do is use the rotation thing here and make the rotation around the y-axis. So I don't want them to tilt like this or like that. I just want them to turn in the y direction, just a little bit. So I'm going to crank that value up just a tiny bit because I want them all to walk in the same direction. I don't want them to walk all over the place. I'm just going to adjust those, hit surface scatter again, and then DAZ Studio recalculates the position and the size and the orientation of these objects. And there we go. So now we have a lot more variation in our scene there. But they're still facing the wrong way. So the easiest thing to do that then is to select our plane again and go and, well, that is really slowing down my computer. Perhaps I'm going to invisibilize all the cockroaches. That should make my computer a little bit more responsive again. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And except for my own little small cockroach here, that's still at the front there. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn this thing around, spin this around. Whoops, actually that's probably easier with the parameters tab than trying to wing it with the manipulator here. There, let's see what happens if we go into here, the X, well, rotation, that is minus 180 degrees. And that should be fairly rock solid. If I now bring the corridor back, I should hopefully see that yes, the placement is still correct. Let me just switch on my, with those things, with a little bit zooming in there, let me bring my cockroaches back, and they should now face the correct direction. Yes, there we go. They're all facing forward, so that's very nice. Great, I'm going to go and bring my big cockroaches back as well, and the corridor, of course. Whoa, there's Mama Cockroach over there. Let's go switch it over to the actual camera 1 view. If my computer allows me to do that. It's one of those things. Gotta be really patient here. Yes, camera 1. I should invest in that graphics card, Rod. I was thinking about it. It's just so super expensive. It's crazy. Oh, there's that corridor as well that needs to be brought back. There we go. Let's see what let's save the scene first before we try and render anything here with that, because that's always the big thing, isn't it? You try and render and you go, you've been working 2 hours on the scene, you go, oh, I'm doing a quick render, boom, computer crashes. You go, oh, yeah. That's just not very nice. So always save before you do anything, even a preview render. If I'm even allowed to do that here, let's see. IRA preview. Let's see how quickly my computer can bring that up. I'll have a look at the chat in a minute. I love that you are so active there. I really appreciate that. It's good to have a bit of chat, especially during downtime when you're kind of waiting for your computer to do something. Yes, so I want to look more into this Ultra Scatter thing. I've bought it when the Ultra Scatter Pro was on sale, when that came out. I missed buying the advanced version when he announced it, when Harry Fox announced it. I thought it was very interesting, especially because I knew what he did with the Carrara replicator, and when he announced it in the forums, he said, yeah, actually this is basically the Carrara replicator now doing its thing in DAZ. But I have no idea how he did it, so he must be a script developer of some kind. Very technical brain, that man, but a very, very beautiful developer. If you've seen the Habsburg scenes or all the what did he call them again? I forgot what the name of that was now, but he does extremely nice landscape scenes. And when you open them up in when you make a scene either in Carrara or in DAZ Studio, and you create something with this Ultra Scatter plugin to scatter your instances, and you save the scene and you want to distribute the scene, check it out. It's very exciting. users don't have to own the Ultrascatter plugin to render the instances. So if I were to give you this scene now, and you had the cockroach and the corridor and all the other items we're using, then the scattered instances will still be renderable by your own version of DAZ Studio, even without you owning the Ultrascatter plugin. So it's very, very cool to remember. You don't have to own it in order to render that scene. So very nice. I'm glad it comes in handy, Rod. I'm seriously thinking about it, but it's about $800-900. I don't think my computer can actually handle it. I don't know if it fits in the slot there, but yeah, it's one of those things. My computer is still preparing the scene. So, you know, what we could do is we could just go and, like they do in the cooking shows, they go, here's one I prepared earlier for you. Hey, this is what's going to look like. Roundabout there. Maybe we get to see the live picture in a moment. That would be kind of nice. But yeah, this is all these little critters now rendered out there. And yeah, this in my preview here, I guess the light was a little bit too light still. I would like it a little bit darker. But yeah, that's how I did it. And you could go ahead now and create separate planes for the sides and even for the ceiling, and use a lower number of objects there to scatter them, and then you could have that corridor crawling with bugs. So that is one thing that you can do. Yes, I believe it's physically large, isn't it, Rod? The card is physically large, so there's the power supply considerations, CPU considerations. Yeah, I mean, I've heard of a gamer on YouTube, and she recently replaced her card with something else because her computer couldn't render a game that she had bought for $60. I believe it was Far Cry 5, and so she had to buy a whole new computer just to play that game. One of those things. Is my computer getting there? No, he's still preparing the scene, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. I'm sure we're going to get there eventually, but perhaps not in this demonstration. If perhaps we're just going to wrap it up for today. Is that a good idea? Yeah, I think that's a great idea. That's a great idea. I will, once I'm done here, I'm just going to post one of those pictures that we're rendering here exactly with these settings on my gallery at Renderosity. Perhaps I'll do that. Yeah. And that was basically it for today. I hope my little tips and tricks were helpful. Sometimes it's nice challenge and come up with a scene that I have to build once a week, so that's kind of nice. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next week, but if you do have any questions or follow-up things, perhaps we can keep it with the Ultrascatter, because perhaps I'm going to do something like a landscape thing where I'm going to have one tree and we can replicate that several hundred times across a scene, or perhaps a little patch of grass and we can plaster that all over a kind of a landscape thing. Perhaps that's a good idea. Perhaps we should do that. If you have any other ideas or any suggestions of what you want to see in live streams in the future, please let me know. This was my 5th one this year. I'm having fun. If you're having fun, judging by the communication we've got going here, let's keep it up every Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Anything else? No, I think that was it. Folks, have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and I will see you later. Take care. Bye-bye.